this maybe one-off meeting of the Harwich Conservation Commission on January 31st, 2025 in the Don B. Griffin Room in Town Hall. The purpose of the meeting today is to have a discussion specifically about fertilizer and nutrient use on properties in the town of Harwich. I think the discussion may be a little broader and include herbicides and pesticides and other treatments for lawns in particular. I want to, well, first I'll review what we're going to do today, and then, so first, I'm going to start the meeting with a few comments, mostly about why we're here and why we decided to have this meeting. Then Amy will have some comments, and during Amy's comments, she will go around the room and allow people who are attending the meeting, other than commissioners, to introduce themselves and state briefly what their concerns might be. Then we will have a presentation. The feature is Russ Norton, who is an extension educator from the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension. Amy will introduce him, and then we will have an opportunity for questions and comments based on the previous discussion from commission members. And when we're done with the commission members' questions and comments, then the public will have an opportunity both in the room and online. We have several people online to pose questions and make comments. And when we're done with that, the last item on the agenda is just an introduction of pond buffer guidance, which was recently released by the Cape Cod Commission, and Amy will do that. So I just want to say a little bit about the background of what we're here and maybe try to address what we're trying to accomplish, although we'll see how I do with that. But so to start with, the issue of fertilizers in the town of Harwich has been on the table for voters, for the select board, and for citizens for several years. The condition of our environment in town is a top concern of Harwich residents. Specifically, everybody's aware, or many people are aware, that excess nutrients are an issue in our saltwater embayments and a primary reason why we are going through the very expensive process of sewering a good part of the town. I think it's becoming more known to people in town that it's not just nitrogen in the saltwater embayments. We also have a problem with phosphorus in our freshwater ponds, as evidenced by algae blooms that have been happening in the last few years in various ponds. So I think it's pretty well understood that the largest contributor to nutrient loading, both in freshwater ponds and in our saltwater embayments, is septic systems in town, which is why we're doing the very expensive sewering process. But it has also been noted, and I think widely accepted, that the second most prevalent contributor to nutrient loading, both in ponds and in saltwater embayments, is landscape treatments, primarily nutrients in landscape treatments, commonly fertilizer, but that's not the only source of nutrients in landscape treatments. That might be a little more controversial, which is why we're in this room today, to have that conversation about that. And I'll just say, in recent years, there have been attempts to set the stage for either banning or tightly controlling fertilizer applications in Harwich, and to date, those attempts have not been sufficiently supported by either our political leadership or town voters to actually come into effect. That doesn't mean the concern has gone away. One of the items that has been mentioned in arguments against attempting to assert local control over application of fertilizers and other nutrient sources to our landscapes is that really the issue is the public doesn't understand what the issue is, and what we need to do is educate the public. And that is a primary incentive for what we're doing today. I would just like to say that I agree that public education is an issue, but public education has a number of components. One is the first one, which is that we would like everyone in town who is applying a fertilizer anywhere to have a very good grasp of what is currently considered to be best practices, mostly established by the state and by reference by the state, by the UMass. I also personally think that the public has to understand also what the obligations of commercial applicators are under current state law, which I don't believe is well understood at all. And partly probably because a reading of state law and of the UMass guidelines is not particularly straightforward. And I also think that part of what I like to see happen, maybe not so much today, but maybe today, but in the future, is a promulgation in public of the best current science on the contribution to saltwater and freshwater nutrient loading from landscaping practices in total. And I don't know if there's a very good common understanding about any of that. So what I would like to see today is a discussion of, first of all, of the use of fertilizers and nutrient-containing landscape treatments within Conservation Commission jurisdictional areas townwide. That is, in wetland resource areas, in the 100-foot buffer to wetland resources, and in the 200-foot buffer to riparian or riverine environment. And I don't think it's that much of a secret that the Conservation Commission has had continuing problems enforcing restrictions on fertilizer application and nutrient application on areas within a 100-foot buffer. And hopefully education, as hopefully will happen today, will have some effect, but we need to have an ongoing discussion about how we can reduce the violation of restrictions that are placed on people's deeds, actually, for applying fertilizer in the 100-foot buffer. And I also think the other thing I would like to see happen today is a clarification of the existing licensing, record-keeping, and recording requirements and reporting requirements for plant nutrient application, pesticides, and really any other substance of emerging concern like PFAS or anything else that we can have discussion with. So that's what I have to say. I'm going to pass it over to Amy to make comments, and we'll have some introduction in the room today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Sasky. I'm the Conservation Administrator for the town. For those of you who don't know me, I think I know pretty much everybody in this room. But we're really happy that it came today. This is what we would usually be part one of probably a multi-part series or discussion. The aim is really education of staff, commissioners, the public, and about what are the best management practices for nutrient management. We all care about our waters, and we just want to make sure that the things that we're doing are not hurting them in any way. So before we talk about, there's been talk and petitions about bans and things like that. I think a lot of that might come from also not understanding. So the goal of this is to have everybody come together and understand what's being done, the requirements of the landscaping contractors, the reporting requirements already required of them. And so then at the end, kind of have a roundtable discussion It's supposed to be an informal work session after our presentations where we can start getting the questions out and hopefully answering some of these questions and maybe dispelling some misnomers along the way. So we don't really have an agenda for the next one set up yet because we want to see what comes out of this and where this leads to. I guess before I introduce our primary speaker, we have a fairly small group in here. I was hoping you could just go around the room real quick, say your name. If you're with a company, say your company. If you're not, if you're with a garden club or with a pond association, just let us know what maybe your interest is. I think we have a really nice, rounded out group of different parties here. So Willie Gooding is my assistant agent who's here in the commission. And Bill, why don't we start with Bill?
Bill Galvin, Cape Cod Chronicle.
John Sennett, licensed pesticide applicator.
Warren Nichols, landscape Harwich for the last 45 years. I have a degree in turf management, plant science. I'm a licensed applicator, restricted use, license. I don't know what else I can say. I'm concerned about licensing more than anything.
Russ Norton, extension engineer on the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension.
And we'll go behind you.
Rich Walker, Harwich Pond Coalition. Patrick Otten, also Harwich Pond Coalition. And as well, I will be submitting once again 2 citizens petitions and home rule petitions so that Harwich can determine the application of both pesticides and grow.
Scott Norm, also Harwich Ponds Coalition and Hinkley's Pond Association.
Matt Sutton, Lavender Farm.
Carolyn O'Leary, Garden Club. Diane DeGenero, Conservation Committee of the Garden Club. Jerry Schuman, same thing.
Josh Rapani, Advanced Turf Pros, licensed applicator.
Ryan Birch, Advanced Turf Pros as well, 20 years in the community industry, and is a certified licensed.
Tom Birch, you heard me before. Landscape contractor, business owner, since 1987, Cape Cod, Harwich.
Keith Johnson, Blue Fox Design.
Dave.
Dave Callahan, Great Sand Lakes Association.
Carrie Sharner, Health Director.
Bob Kingston, Superintendent of Harrisburg Golf Club.
Allie Paterno, Harwich Ponds Coalition. Susan Sear, Harwich Ponds Coalition. Garden Club.
We do have a couple of folks online as well. Anybody who wants to introduce themselves, this is your time.
I'm Stan Selko, I'm online. Hi.
I see CZ and Mike Tanis from Blue Flags and a couple other folks. So thank you all for joining us. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Russ Norton. Russ is an extension educator with the Cape Cod Commission, and he's going to give us a little background on nutrient management today.
So, just a quick correction, I'm from Cape Cod Cooperative
Oh, I'm
Extension,
sorry.
not from the Cape Cod Commission, different organizations. But, yeah, so I am an extension educator in for the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and also for the UMass Landscape Nursery and Urban Forestry Program. And so I was reached out to by John and Amy, I don't know, a week or 2 ago, just to give kind of a little overview of nutrient management, and we're really going to be looking at like phosphorus and nitrogen, and so just a little bit of background information for you guys. So let's roll into it. So first up here, it's important to note that why are we talking about these 2 nutrients? Nitrogen and phosphorus are essential plant nutrients. What does essential mean? It means that plants cannot live without them. Nitrogen and phosphorus are crucial for a lot of functions in plants, and they affect yield, growth, and performance of those plants. What? Do I have to speak into it? We're good? I'll try to stand here, but it's not likely. That's kind of like the background from the plant side, but it's like friend or foe, right? So for the plant, these nutrients are essential, they're important for plants, but then what about them in the environment? So they tend to be limiting nutrients in water, and so we generally think about phosphorus as being a limiting nutrient in freshwater systems, and nitrogen a limiting nutrient in saltwater systems. Of course, that is not absolute. There's plenty of where they might cross over. And what happens when you add additional nutrients to a limiting situation? You get growth. And here we're talking about algae growth, right? Plant growth in the water that leads to poor water quality, right? And a lot of that is when that plant material dies and then has to be broken down, which leads to the process of eutrophication and water body. So that's kind of what we're concerned about. Kind of. So we are concerned about. So sources of nutrients. Where do they come from? Well, there are natural sources of these nutrients. So they come, phosphorus comes from terrestrial rocks, actually. A major source of fertilizer phosphorus is from mined stone, rock phosphates. Also, we have a tremendous amount of these nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, in the soil, held onto soil particles. And then we also have a major portion of them coming from organic material, okay? Organic material is carbon-containing or once living pieces that are in the soil, okay? That contains a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus. And then there's also some atmospheric nitrogen that is deposited on our soils in rain and snow, a small amount. And then there's a bunch of these human sources. So sediment really comes from soil, right? But it is the activities in which we disrupt soil that allows its movement through erosion, which is how sediment contributes. Septic tanks and wastewater, of course. Fertilizer, yes. Animal waste, and even in the atmosphere from industrial processes. But I'm going to spend the time talking about fertilizer, maybe a little bit about animal waste on the side. And so the reason that we're talking about this is because the human pieces are controllable, right? We have the ability to control the way we use those nutrients, and we can do that to make sure that they're not getting into our water body. So this is not as clear as I would like it for you all to see, but this is the nitrogen cycle as it pertains to soil and plants. And so you can see that it is not necessarily super simple, right? What we're looking at here, what's going on here? Can I use the laser pointer on this? Yeah, sure.
Jeez.
So I guess I can't use the laser.
I think the laser pointer is the one in the front, sir,
Yeah.
not the one in the back.
I got it here. Know which one it is. Yeah, it is. It's not working. All right, so I will not use the laser pointer. I will verbally spell it out when we get this back up. So we have different, basically what's identified here is that there are inputs in the blue, there are the components in the green, and then there are the losses to the environment in the red. All right, so if we think about the blues, how do this is the nitrogen cycle, we'll cover the phosphorus cycle next. There are different ways that these nutrients are inputted into the system. So on the top left there, we have atmospheric fixation and deposition. Okay, this would be The air is 80% nitrogen that we have around us, right? There is some deposition when it precipitates to the ground. Lower than that, you have animal manures and biosolids. So feces from animals, manures contain these nutrients as well as sources from plant residues. So anything that was once living has nitrogen in it because it's a component of cells. And then we also have a situation where there are certain plant species, those species generally in the legume family, that have a situation where they can have a symbiotic relationship with a rhizobia bacterium, in which they can fix nitrogen from the air into their plant. And all those sources contribute to what we would call the organic nitrogen in the soil, all right? That organic nitrogen in the soil. That piece then gets mineralized by microbes to become ammonium, all right? It is important to note that the organic fraction of soil is not, plants are not able to take it up in the organic form, all right? It gets mineralized by microbes into ammonium, in which some plants can take up nitrogen. It can also then get nitrified into nitrate, which is the primary nutrient by which plants take out nitrogen. Okay? So important to note that that process works all the way through. So the organic material is broken down by soil microbes. So everything that impacts soil microbes impacts the release of nitrogen. So temperature, water, pH, all the things that impact microbes impact those processes. Right? We also have another potential contributor in what we would sometimes refer to as synthetic fertilizers. Okay, these are fertilizers that are created using fossil fuels, in which they also fix nitrogen from the air, but then can be applied to soil. Those nutrients come directly, typically in the ammonium and nitrate form. All right, so they don't have to go through the organic material breakdown to become available to the plants. They can become immediately available to the plants, water soluble, basically. From there are different ways that nitrogen can be lost from the system. All right? You see that the organic material, the ammonium, and the nitrogen are all in the soil. So obviously, if that soil moves, with it go the nutrients. So erosion, runoff are big factors in the movement of those nutrients. In some cases, those nutrients can be lost through the process of denitrification. Okay? It's another microbial process by which nitrate can be basically released into the air, but that doesn't happen here very often because that requires saturated soil conditions. All right, and that basically and a lack of oxygen to leach of that process. The other way is through leaching. Okay, so once things are in that nitrate form, they're very easily leached. Okay, how do things get leached? The movement of water. So when water gets into soil, it is pulled by gravity. And when you have coarse soils like we have, a lot of water is lost through gravity. So those nutrients that are in the solution go with it, and that's the leaching portion. What else do we want to say? There is losses that also occur because plants are taking up these nutrients, right? The plant material is taking up the ammonium, it's taking up the nitrogen, and bringing it into the plant. And whether that goes back into the earth or gets removed, both are possible. So that's kind of the basics of the nitrogen cycle. It's really important to understand how that all works, because that is where the inputs come from, how the materials work in the soil, and then how they actually get off-site. Okay? The same works for the phosphorus cycle. It's slightly different. Not greatly different, but slightly different than the nitrogen cycle. We have a whole bunch of organic phosphorus that comes from the same thing, things that were once living, okay? Manures, feces, plant material, dying microbes, dying roots contribute to that organic phosphorus. That also gets mineralized. So mineralized, think of decomposition. Organisms in the soil have to decompose it to provide a water-soluble form of phosphorus that can be then taken up by plants. Okay, so there are some other sources of phosphorus in the soil as well. So we have primary minerals, so the particles of soil get weathered and can release phosphorus. So the weathering of stone, in many cases, releases phosphorus. And then there's two other factors here in the soil, the adsorption to other particles in the soil, so this happens a lot with iron and aluminum, and then the precipitation. The precipitation of phosphorus is kind of like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with doing basic chemistry. You mix two things together, a chemical reaction occurs in a liquid, and you end up with a solid. So those two processes can take phosphorus out of the soil solution, but can also give it back to the soil solution. So the losses here, I'm not going to press the pointer button, even though I really want to. Runoff and erosion, all right? All those processes are in the soil. So all those phosphorus, when soil moves, it goes with it. The other portion is leaching. For a long time, it was not considered that leaching was a major portion for phosphorus contamination. For a long time, scientists thought it was primarily runoff and erosion. But what they have found is that there is substantial leaching of phosphorus when phosphorus contents in the soil solution get high and when you have coarse soils, as we do on the Cape Cod. So
Can you define the word leaching?
yeah, it is the movement of solutes through the soil with water. I don't know if that's the technical definition, but that's the definition I'm going to give. Nutrient management. So this is, now we're going to kind of switch gears, a little bit of background about the nutrients. We're going to talk about how some of the UMass guidelines, how we kind of think about nutrient management, and some of the philosophies. So nutrient management infers a responsibility for the fate of applied nutrients prioritizing environmental protection and enhancement. Okay, so we're talking about how we're going to manage them and how we're going to protect the environment from these losses. And we really need to understand that these are very complex systems and that there is no one-size-fits-all for nutrient recommendations. So some of the things that we need to think about when we're creating a nutrient management plan is the analysis of the existing conditions and fertility. So you have to have an understanding of your soil's physical characteristics, right? To me, what does that mean? You have to know your soil's texture. Okay? Texture is the proportions of sand, silt, and clay in a soil, and they provide very specific characteristics that enable leaching, but also how well nutrients are held in the soil. Another portion of that physical portion is organic matter. Okay? Organic matter and clay soil particles have a negative surface area, we call this cation exchange capacity, that allows the soil to hold on to the nutrients, especially positively charged nutrients. Negatively charged, it's kind of like opposites attract. So if there's a negatively charged, a lot of the nutrients are positively attracted, that holds them onto the soil. Negatively charged nutrients, this is why ammonia is typically held in the soil and nitrate is leached. Ammonia is positively charged, nitrate is negatively charged. Our soils don't have much organic matter or clay in them. They're primarily sands. So a good portion of Cape Cod is what we would consider a Carver coarse sand type of soil. And so they're susceptible to leaching. They have very, very few spots for nutrients to be held onto and are basically infertile. Okay? So that's one portion, that physical portion. Yeah.
Can we interrupt and ask questions?
I have no idea.
It's up to you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think that's fine as long as it doesn't take
So-
over the thing.
Thank you. So I think we all understand our coarse soils. But that's not a precursor to having a poor or bad cation exchange capacity. If if you do have a good cation exchange capacity, that leaching isn't gonna happen, am I correct?
Yes and no. So cation exchange capacity is directly related to organic matter content and clay. And so your content from clay, which is directly related to texture, is driving your cation exchange capacity as well as your organic matter content. So those are, yeah, extremely
So
important.
if a home lawn, as an example, or a ballpark, or a golf course, improves and increases its cation exchange capacity, there's a direct relation where the leaching is declines.
You would protect yourself from
Yes.
the loss of nutrients.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be sure people understood a little bit about
Yeah,
cation exchange.
that's great.
I have a question related to that too, because as far as I understand, there isn't any clear numbers about rates of exchange, like depending what's in the soil. So
Exact science.
it's an exact science. I've never seen anybody with precise information on how long it takes for.
There's half a dozen of us that have many forms in our offices.
So we'll go through a soil test and we'll show you where cation exchange capacity is. It is a measured entity in a soil test. Any other questions, thoughts?
Thank you.
Well, there's people wondering what that means. No, it's important that you know. I mean, it's important, right?
What's
So-
a cat eye?
So ions are basically positively charged ions in the soil, okay? The cation exchange capacity is basically the measurement of the negative surface charge of soil. Okay? So which allows for those positively charged ions to be held onto those negatively charged soil particles. Right? A lot of our nutrients are in the forms of cations.
An example might be, if I could interject, the cation exchange capacity of Bank Street Beach sand might be 0.01, 0.04.
Something like that.
But the soil at White House Field that's been established for 40 years, very good soil there, it might be as high as 15.
Yeah.
The higher you get above 10, the better off the world is.
All right, we ready to go on? I'm not sure why they go to the next slide. The material's missing on the slide.
I'm not sure where that is.
So, the other piece, we'll just leave it on this slide, of existing conditions and fertility is soil testing. So that is a way that we can actually measure the amount of nutrients in the soil. Okay? So on a soil test, we measure a whole bunch of different nutrients, but phosphorus is definitely one of the ones that it's measured. So the availability of phosphorus to plants is measured on a soil test, which directly informs whether we need to add phosphorus to the soil. Right? So it directly informs from what is there. With nitrogen, it's a little bit more complicated because nitrogen in the soil is dynamic. And what that means is that it changes the different forms. So from that organic to ammonium to nitrate, it's moving back and forth through all three of those forms constantly. And so our measurement of nitrogen in the soil does not actually do a good job of predicting a plant's needs for nitrogen. Because when we take a soil test today and measure that nitrogen, the form that it's in a couple of days might not be available to that plant. Okay? So it's dynamic, making it difficult. So the nitrogen recommendations that come for plants from a soil test is based on a long, long history of research with plants, measuring responses due to applications. And in some cases, it's measured due to the plant's needs. So if we take probably the easiest examples are agronomic examples, where you grow a crop, you harvest it, and what is removed in the crop is a certain amount of nutrients. And the rates for nitrogen are what is removed in that crop, all right? So that's how that need is determined. And we basically, on a soil test, which is not showing up here, is broken down into very low, low, optimum, and above optimum categories. In the very low and low categories, we know that plants will have a response through the addition of nutrients. In the optimum category on a soil test, there is no guarantee that there will be any response. So the optimum is kind of like the ideal economic and environmental category for a soil nutrient to be in. And then there's the above optimum category, which does not have a negative impact on plant growth, but this is a place where nutrients definitely do not need to be added. There will be no need for additional nutrients. And specifically with phosphorus, the UMass soil test also has an excessive category, and that is when soil phosphorus reaches 40 parts per million on the soil test. That is considered elevated risk for the losses of phosphorus to the environment, either through runoff or through leaching, right?
I have a question. I've been doing soil tests for the last 20 years on properties. Never has it been a requirement for phosphorus to be added, nor can you buy fertilizer with phosphorus in it on a regular application. You can't purchase phosphorus. They took it out of the.
And synthetic fertilizers for the turf industry, it's been out of them for at least 20 years.
But the phosphorus levels are still above average, and it hasn't been added in at least 20 years.
And turf system, using synthetic fertilizer.
So that being said, why are we even discussing phosphorus when
We can't purchase it.
we're not applying it?
So not everyone is not applying it. And so there are other forms that are being applied in system. And so this only applies to turf. There are plenty of other fertilizers. So we're not just talking about turf here. We're talking about plant nutrients in general. And phosphorus is still being applied as organic matter because all organic things contain phosphorus in system. Right? So we need to know that existing piece, that's crucial. We also need to know the plant's nutritional needs, and then reducing our nutrient applications to the lowest possible level to maintain the function or desirable level that we need. And so basically what we're saying here is that there is no need to provide nutrients beyond the function that we need. So excessive nutrients, increased risk of losing or being taken off the site and contributing to environmental contamination. So this is just, every time with this freaking pointer. So if we're looking at this, the chart there is the nitrogen fertilizer recommendations from UMass based on the different types of turf grasses. So it's important to note that different plants have different needs for nutrients. Even within turf grasses, different types of turf grasses have different needs for nutrients. So we have ones that we consider having medium to high fertility needs, and some that have really low fertility needs. So the vine fescues tend to be in the low fertility needs. Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass tend to be in the higher categories. And then within those needs, there is a range. Right? So here this is showing 2 to 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per season or per year for Kentucky bluegrass. That range, if we're trying to do the lowest possible level to maintain function, we would start at the 2. All right? So there is some flexibility in there. But we want to keep that lowest level, yes.
Can you also show this for Cape Cod lawn?
This is for the lawn grasses, so this is regardless of location in Massachusetts, okay?
I think Patrick's point is not the location of it, it's the mix of the plants within it. And what's called the Cape Cod lawn here is like some clover and some, I don't know, help me out, Amy, what else is in a Cape Cod lawn?
Rising fescues.
Uh-huh.
Those grasses plus weeds.
Yeah, yeah. The fine fescue would be the low-end maintenance lawn, all right? So, the Cape Cod line is not really a defined thing or a well-defined thing. So you could say it's an area that is unmaintained or an area with really, fine fescues, maybe some weeds, clover in it, all depends, right? So, but here we're talking about the different turf grass types. And so fine fescues, you know, if you're thinking about having a lawn that is low maintenance, that is where you would focus your efforts, right, on planting. We need to be, I mean, we're at a Conservation Commission meeting, so this slide's almost redundant, but awareness of sensitive sites and potential off-site movement. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that you need to know where the buffer zones are, where surface bodies of water are, slopes, potential for erosion, catch basins that lead to waterways. And just knowing where those are, mapping them out, and making sure that when you're doing the application of nutrients, that they're part of your plan. Then we need to look at putting down these nutrients when they're necessary, according to a soil test and your site's conditions, according to the plant's needs, at the right time. So when plants need them. Certain plants need certain nutrients at certain times, at the right rate. So to determine a rate, not only do you need to know how much of that nutrient is supposed to be applied, but the size area that you're applying it to. So you have to have the details of the size of the area. And then the different sources. Different sources of nutrients have different methods of releasing those. So we know that, we talked about this when we were talking about the nitrogen cycle. Organic nutrients require a microbial process to provide those nutrients to the plant. It has to be broken down into an inorganic nutrient for the plant to take it up. Whereas other ones are water soluble, so that affects how we apply them. And where we're putting them. Generally, if we can put them by the root system, that is the best way to place them. This diagram just shows kind of a general diagram for turf, and that turf grows are cool season turfs that we use typically in the Northeast. They have a strong growing season in the spring and a strong growing season in the fall, and we're trying to focus any nutrient applications at the time when they would take them up the best, being around those times. And if you're limited to like one fall application in a low maintenance turf, you know, you kind of time that around Labor Day or so. So there's a lot of nuances to that whole piece. But then the next piece is knowing that we have to account for all nutrients inputs. I think some of this discussion was around the use of compost in systems, because compost is a nutrient-containing source. And then we also have to consider all the practices that are going into whatever planting system it is. All right? I show a picture here of a clover lawn. Clover mixed with grasses provides nutrients, so it's going to lower your nutrient needs for turf if you have clovers mixed in your lawn. Simple practices like aeration and watering have huge impacts on the amount of nutrients that are needed and how available they're going to be to the plant. So we're kind of, you know, using all the information that we have to develop that nutrient management plan. Now that's kind of like the overview. I'm going to go really quickly here through the regulations that already exist. These are regulations that exist for the application of plant nutrients to turf from the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Research. So they're pretty straightforward, and they cover a lot of things we just talked about. So phosphorus-containing fertilizer may only be applied when a soil test indicates that it is needed or when turf or a lawn is being established, patched, or renovated. Okay? So a soil test should be is valid for 3 years, so you should have one for every 3 years for the site that you are applying nutrients to. Pretty straightforward. Okay? When applying plant nutrients such as animal manure, fertilizer, organic compost, natural organic fertilizer, biosolids, agricultural byproducts, digestates, or any combination thereof, the following shall apply. the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus must be known and accounted for. And what does that mean? If you're applying compost to a lawn, you have to have an analysis of that compost because it is providing nutrients to that system, all right? That doesn't come with a bag of compost. You might have to do some work to actually get that. A soil test has to be available for the site of application. So you have to know what the analysis of the product you're putting down is. You have to have a soil test. And then the application of these materials shall not exceed the phosphorus rates for the maintenance or renovation of turf or lawn as specified by UMass guidelines. And they're right down there at the bottom, in that very low, optimum, and above optimum category. Yes.
Does that 3-year soil test apply to this as well, or just the slide before, just the phosphorus
Yes.
test?
Yep. Yeah, they're kind of pulled out directly from the guidelines from NBI. So that applies to all this.
So these are best management practices.
This is law.
This is law.
Yep.
And are you gonna talk about enforcement?
Yes.
I'm not a regulatory authority,
Okay.
okay? Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources is the regulatory authority, and they can be reached up to for that detail, all right? So these requirements shall not apply to a couple situations. A single application made within 12-month period at an application rate not to exceed 0.25 pounds of phosphorus per 1,000 square feet, or any product used containing less than 0.67 or less of phosphorus. So some exceptions there. Okay? But you can see how the UMass soil test for phosphorus directly relates to the application amount. And if you're applying compost to turf, you should have an analysis for that compost, and you should still be falling within the guidelines for UMass.
Just so you're aware too, the Harwich Health Department has a policy and guidelines which mirrors this. So if you want any of this in writing, I did print it and have it.
So can you talk about enforcement?
I cannot, I am not the enforcement agent either. This is not a regulation, it's only a guideline and policy.
Okay, thank you.
So these other parts of the law, I think, are pretty straightforward if you think about how these nutrients work in soil. No application, and now this isn't phosphorus specific, it says a plant nutrient shall be made to frozen or snow-covered turf or soil. That's kind of a no-brainer. To saturated soil or soils that are frequently flooded. Within 20 feet of waterways if using broadcast method, or 10 feet if using a more targeted application method such as a drop spray. Within a zone 1 of a public well, or 100 feet of a surface water body for public drinking, in amounts that exceed UMass guidelines for plant nutrient applications to turf, or to drought dormant, cold dormant, inaccurate, or otherwise not turf. Right? I think that's, these are kind of no-brainers. Right? So what-
Something happening outside, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it's in here. Two other pieces to that regulation.
Could somebody shut the door back there?
It's coming over speakers.
Yeah.
It's my hearing that.
It changes when you speak through the microphone.
Is everyone online muted?
Okay, you're right. Oh, okay.
So the last slide there is really, application of biosalts has its own regulatory requirements, so it's kind of outside just discussion. And then part of that regulation is that folks that are applying these nutrients need to keep records available for the nutrient applications that they do. And again, I am not the regulatory authority. These are the regulations, and they would be enforced by the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources through their nutrient program. So with that, I guess, any questions? Yeah.
Okay, I think what we're going to do is allow commissioners to ask questions or make comments, and then we can have comments and questions from the public, but we'll start with Wayne,
I don't have anything at the moment, I'm still learning here.
okay? Vivian?
I don't have anything right now, but maybe circle back to me in a couple of minutes, please.
I have no remarks right now, thank you.
Sophia?
I think I'll wait too.
Well, I'm going to be the one with all the questions then. First question is, maybe you answered this in your talk, but if you did, I didn't take it in. When there are excessive nutrients applied, phosphorus or nitrogen, particularly from organic sources, can you say anything about the fate? I mean, you did refer to leaching, but can you be any more specific or about what becomes? I mean, if you put an organic treatment on a soil that markedly exceeds the requirements of the plant, what happens to those nutrients?
Yeah, so, looking at this slide, right? If you put on nutrients excessively in the form of organic materials, right? They're gonna be that organic nitrogen portion, right? That portion is gonna be actively degraded by microbes. We call that mineralization, right? That mineralization is gonna turn it into ammonium, which in a really sandy soil could be leached itself, right? That process, when there's a lot of ammonium in the soil solution, automatically gets nitrified to nitrate, and then it is simply rainfall that will move that through the soil. So whether it's an organic source or a non-organic source, they all kind of go through that same process. Well, I mean, the non-organic ones don't go through the decomposition, but all the organic ones do. And so that is the fate, all right?
So is there like a time frame? Is there like a half-life of excess nitrogen in the soil, or a range of half-lives, or any number like that that would sort of inform us about whether it's a week or 10 years or something in between?
It doesn't disappear, it changes where it goes, right? So the organic nitrogen in, say, let's just use something like compost, it's getting decomposed, it goes into ammonia. Microbes can actually take the ammonium and turn it back into living organic matter, right? So it can go back and forth there. It can also get taken up into the plant. And so there's a lot of recycling in natural systems. What you generally put on, ideally you would keep right within it, right? So you're trying to reduce the leaching, the excessive application. I don't know really how else to figure what you're saying. It's
Okay.
very, you'd have to know all the details to be able to give you a number or something like that. There is no half-life to nitrogen, it's gonna change forms. And that's why we don't have a nitrogen test for soil, is because what you test today and what form it is doesn't necessarily gonna be there tomorrow. And that's really dependent on environmental conditions like water, soil microbial activity, temperature.
So, trying to interpret your answer, what you're saying is it could be anything from the nitrogen stays in the soil and eventually gets taken up by plants, anything from that to within a relatively short amount of time, it gets leached out and ends up in the groundwater and eventually in our ponds and estuaries.
Yeah, you would imagine if you put nitrate on the ground on a sandy soil and it's immediately available in the water solution, and then you get a heavy rain, then a lot would be leached.
So, can you say anything about what is known about the actual contribution of nutrients applied to our landscapes to the nutrient loading in the water? Is there any science that directly addresses that contribution?
So there is a lot of science that looks at it, and it's complicated. So some of the there's a lot of assumptions made in that research, to be able to get to numbers. But I think a lot of folks feel fairly comfortable with, research that suggests around 10% of the nitrogen loading in the bodies of water may have come from fertilizer. But, that is not a measurement of actual nitrogen applied to actual nitrogen moving through the soil to them being measured in the water.
Okay.
It is far different than those
So
actual
it's
measurements.
kind of a finger in the wind.
Not, I mean, they're trying their best with the science that they have, yeah.
Right.
John, can the peanut gallery ask questions now, or is it still?
I've got more questions, I'm sorry, but we're gonna have another hour for people to ask questions. I need to get these off my chest, I'm sorry. What happens, specifically, can you say anything about what happens to nitrogen that is fixed from, for example, clover or some other nitrogen-fixing
It has all
plant?
the same possibilities as all the other sources.
Okay.
But nothing's fixed. But that nitrogen is not fixed.
I'm using it in a sense that I understand it, which may be different from what you're thinking, which is the plants take the nitrogen from the atmosphere one way or another and get it into themselves, as opposed to nitrogen putting down from some other external place. It's from the atmosphere. That's all I mean when I say fixed.
No different, it's the organic
Well, that, right,
portion of this,
Right.
as
Right.
opposed to the synthetic
Yeah.
portion of this.
got it.
But it would be then susceptible to going to all the inorganic forms.
So you mentioned at the end, biosolids and regulations in a different section of the CMR. But are there any restrictions in all of that on how biosolids can be applied with other nutrients on any lawns or any landscapes in Massachusetts?
Yeah, there are a whole separate set of regulations that I'm not familiar with about the application of biosolids.
Do you think they would apply to application of anything on Cape Cod? Any composting that includes biosolids? Do you think that that's something that has to be accounted for in the application of materials with biosolids?
So,
Sorry, can you all go to the podium, it's right in front of the board?
yeah, so, I guess a clarification of the definition of biosolids, in this case, I think is coming directly from, waste management and the use of those materials, so not compost and manures.
But your definition is something that is covered by the term municipal biosolids.
So,
I'm asking, that's a question.
so, I guess my question is, what are you, saying?
When I see a product that says it's manufactured in part from municipal biosolids, I'm assuming it's from municipal waste, like what they collected, whatever the plant is in Boston Harbor or maybe over in Chatham or whatever. I take that to mean that, but I don't know for a fact that it does.
Yeah,
Is,
It
Yeah.
does.
yeah,
okay.
Milorganite's from Wisconsin.
yeah.
I have a question about, I'm just going to boil it down to, you said you don't know anything about enforcement, but my question is, are you aware of any example of the state enforcing overuse of plant nutrients in a way that violates the regulations?
That might also be a question for some people in the room if they know.
Well, great. Okay,
Nicely.
I'm done.
I have two questions, sorry.
Please.
If I can interrupt, I think Warren has an answer to that question.
Well, great, but let's let the commissioners finish and then, please.
I guess I'm wondering if you have a situation where you need to add organic matter, but you do a soil test and you have enough phosphorus, the compost readily available to you contains phosphorus, what are your other options for adding organic matter? With a part two of, do you know how much fertility leaving the clippings adds back into the turf?
So, a couple great questions there. The clippings back, so that's kind of part of the cultural practices to reduce overall nitrogen inputs, because the clippings are, they're taking nitrogen out of the soil. If you return them, they're gonna be decomposed and put back into the system. It's considered a good starting point is to half your nitrogen applications if you're returning clippings to your turf. A good starting point. There's a lot of different research there. A lot of different turf grasses have different amounts of nitrogen in the plant material, so different growth. An irrigated lawn versus a non-irrigated lawn are different amounts of growth, and therefore the amount of biomass is different, which means the amount of nitrogen in that biomass is different. So these are super complex systems to get down to the details. The other portion of that was how do you increase your cation exchange capacity?
Or organic matter without adding phosphorus, if there is phosphorus in the compost that you have?
That's a really great question, and I think it's really difficult. So there are very limited options for that. Kind of looking at things like maybe biochar or something along those lines, but you would also need an analysis of that biochar to conform to the guidelines. So that's a tough situation for Cape Cod on our sandy soils. You want organic matter to try to increase your cation exchange capacity and your water holding capacity to grow the plants that you want, but then there's only so much organic matter that can be held in our soils without leading to environmental contamination from the breakdown of those organic materials. That's a really hard situation to navigate. So finding that balance is difficult.
And also, the healthier and the more plants that you have, the more organic matter is able to be held in the soil. Is that also true, would you say?
So organic matter, like carrying capacity, is often related directly to your texture. And so textures that have more porosity, more oxygen in them, tend to hold on to less organic matter. There's temperature and moisture regimes that are part of that, but so it's not directly related to the biomass on top of the surface. Great question.
Hi. I'm really interested in figuring out ways that people, like, there's a lot of people who just aren't going to give up their lawns, and there's lots of people who just go to Home Depot and dump whatever they find at Home Depot without involving landscapers. So, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to reach people with solutions to prevent the nutrients from going into the water. So, are there particular plants that people could plant, say, as a buffer or a you call these things like a swale. Are there particular plants that could very aggressively filter out some of this nitrogen, phosphorus before it reaches a waterway, and what would those be? Because I'm just thinking if there are certain plants that work really well for Cape Cod, and that could just be planted around the edges, what would they be, and could we promote them?
Sure. So I guess there's two pieces to that. There's one, turf can be managed without contributing nutrients to the environment. We know that. If it's done correctly. And that's kind of what we're trying to outline today. Those plants that would work best in our environment without having the need for inputs would be those plants that are naturally here already. We have lists of all those plants.
I guess what I'm wondering though is not just native plants that survive well here, but native plants that could help filter, like that are like super filters for it. Because people want simple solutions. People want to avoid doing soil tests. They want to avoid like getting involved in the minutia of rates of exchange. They just want something nice and simple. And so I'm just wondering, what are some, like, super aggressive nutrient absorbers that could be put in, you know, as buffers to.
I think the way you're thinking about it is probably not, the way that it works in the soil system. So, if you have a plant system that is filtering, that means that somehow there's being nutrients deposited on the ground, which would be inputs, right? So simply they're just stuff adding the inputs.
So, Ann,
Would be easy to enforce.
Amy is going to talk about the buffer management recommendations, and they'll probably be the kind of information that you're looking for in there. So,
I don't have any super absorbers, but I have suggestions, guidelines that have come out, to help homeowners.
okay, so hang on, there's a queue here. So I think we have one more thing from a commissioner, and then we're going to go to people in the room, starting with Warren here, so.
Oh, well, go ahead, Warren, I'll let you answer the question.
To
and then I'll
apply
ask.
excessive amounts of fertilizer to your lawn is a big mistake in the first place. Cost, danger to the environment. You have to know your fertilizer spreader settings. The other option is going to a controlled release fertilizer in these areas that you feel leaching is an issue. You can get fertilizers at 90% controlled release. They can last up to 20 weeks. Steady feed at less rates than the state requires. That's a possibility.
Okay, so you're triggering me, and the reason you're triggering me is we had a case here a month or more ago of someone who was applying something that is categorized as sort of a compost, and when you look at the analysis that comes from the manufacturer, at the rates that they recommend, they're applying like more than 20 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet.
That falls back on the applicator. That's it.
Well, I know, but see, that's kind of our issue here, is how do we deal with that when that's going on in the town?
You need to be licensed. You need to be educated before they're allowed to apply.
But supposedly, there are state laws already that control this sort of
Yeah,
thing.
but there's no.
Well, okay, so, all right, so let's not, okay, so we could go down a rabbit hole there. It's a discussion that has to be had, but rather than taking up the rest of our time here, I just needed to make that point because it
There are
is.
options to the leaching problems, if they're over applying. People need to learn how to do that.
Right.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman, of the speaker. Going back to leaching, if you, Cape Cod was mostly sand, at least on this side of the Cape. And if you've got 15 to 20 feet of sand from the water table up to your lawn, is that nitrogen gonna make it all the way down 20 feet into the water table? 'Cause our concern, well, at least I was under the understanding of this whole meeting was, drinking water contamination because of this stuff. Now, what's gonna happen when it gets down to the 20-foot mark?
So it has
Anything?
it has the potential to move through the soil, for sure, with the movement of water. And then water on Cape Cod goes from the groundwater slowly
Right.
to the ocean, so it would move with that
By
groundwater.
the time it got down there, it would still be there, the nitrogen.
It would still be there.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's not a lot to change forms as you get deeper in the soil.
Okay,
Good
so
question.
Vivian?
I have two questions. To put you on the spot a little bit, Russ.
Yeah.
If you had, kind of ties in a little bit to what you were saying, but if you could suggest one thing, one simple practice that would maybe mitigate some of this leaching to begin with, what would, in your professional opinion, would that be? And thank you, this was very informative for me anyway.
Yeah, so the simple thing would be to follow the guidelines from UMass.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
just follow
So
guidelines.
have an understanding of what you're doing and the potential ways that it can lead to contamination.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then my next question was just a general question. I just wonder how much soil testing really happens. You know, is that sort of typical landscaper practice in Harwich? Do most landscapers
What's
do?
going on in your soil as far as cation exchange, you're applying magnesium, calcium, those are fat irons that are normally applied. So you'd have to do a soil test to see what the loss is before you put that. You don't have to line them every year.
But how typical do you think? Do you think every landscaper typically does a soil test before they?
Landscaper educated in this? No,
Okay.
very few are. I mean,
Small
you can s-
percentage.
You can see the percentage
The ones
shown here.
that do
They're all
are
here,
in this
yeah,
room.
yeah.
You know, we're licensed, we have to report to the state everything we do. We have to maintain credit hours. You know, licensing isn't cheap. Maintaining it isn't cheap. Reporting has to be done every year, every bit of product we use, whether it be pesticides, has to be reported, every single thing. Where, the other problem I have is, those that don't report, that doesn't go into the overall, figures for what is applied in the state of Massachusetts. If they go to the same place without a license and they just buy the product, put it down, and they're not required to report because they're not licensed, that doesn't go into the overall, big picture. Big picture, right, exactly, of what is actually going in the ground.
Yeah.
You can't control it.
So,
You have to control them first before you can control the problem.
point of clarification. The licensing you're referring to, is that for anything other than pesticide application? They're reporting,
Fertilizer does not require a license to apply.
but there is a reporting requirement, but no license. So the state has no idea who's actually applying nutrients.
Bob reports his pesticide use, or these guys report their pesticide use, that's the only thing that goes into the state report.
What about nutrient application?
No, it's not required.
It's not
But-
reported.
The state, the regulation says those things are supposed to be reported.
They do not ask for fertilizer, nitrogen application.
A clar-
Read,
For pesticide
read
application.
CMR, whatever it is, it says it's all supposed to be reported.
A clarification on that, it's record keeping, it is not
Oh,
reporting.
okay, sorry, record
We keep
keeping.
a record of every application we make with the EPA rate numbers, how much goes down, how many pounds of nitrogen. We know all that by the square footage of our property.
Has anyone ever-
Keep a record of it.
Has anyone ever asked you for those records for any property?
The only records they ask for is use and your credit hours.
Pesticide use.
Pesticide use and credit hours.
Okay, thank you. So,
Okay,
Credit
I'll
hours.
stop.
We have to maintain, if we have a commercial applicator's license, which is category 37 to turf, we need 12 contact hours in 3 years. If it's a regular core applicator, it's 6 hours in 3 years. It's really not enough.
Can I just respond real quick to Viv? I think that if you're doing your own applications as a homeowner and your own homework and following the guidelines, that's the best you can do. If you're hiring a professional, it's completely fair to ask what their processes are. You know, ask if they do soil tests. If they don't have time to do that, if that's, you know, not of interest to them, then that's not the right company for you if you're interested in the quality of their practices. I think that's where the rubber meets the road with a client and the professional. Not all professionals are willing to take the time to do it the right way, but if you want somebody who will do that, it's sort of up to you to say that's important to me, and I would like to see, you know, proof of it, basically.
And
We've been fighting for that for decades. The licensed people in the state. We've been asking and fighting for that for decades.
I'm sorry, for which exactly have you?
For everyone to be created equal in the landscape industry, so that this landscaper here can't go out and throw down whatever she would like, when this landscaper is required to do the right things because this landscaper has a license and has to report to someone. This one does not have to report.
And we're correct in understanding that you do not need a license to apply fertilizer, so,
You do in some Cape Cod towns, Harwich is not
but
one.
not here.
But if it's a combination product with crabgrass control or weed control or insect control, you have to be licensed. If it's Roundup, you have to be licensed. If it has an EPA red number on that bag, you have to be licensed.
But it sounds like
A
that's what,
homeowner can go out and apply anything they want. There's no regulation for a homeowner doing their own property. It's only those who are charging a fee to apply the product.
Keep in mind that people that are pesticide licensed, they're here in this room. We are the ones that do our continuing education. We are the ones that go to these type of meetings. We're the ones that are responsible. We read the labels. We do the best management practices. So when it comes to nutrients, we don't treat it any differently than we do pesticides. We put down the right amounts at the right time. It's the people that don't have licenses that don't, I don't want to say they're certainly not educated in the field, or they're not tested on their education at least. They're the ones that don't read a label. They think this bag fits every size lawn, and it doesn't.
But that's not exclusively homeowners who are
It
doing
is
that.
not exclusively.
Okay, just want to make that,
No, it is not.
So,
Okay, and Scott is next, after you're done, Scott.
So, one of the reasons why we get this whole group together is to get your feedback and your ideas on how we get homeowners, how can we get the unlicensed professionals, to start doing these best management practices. So you know the people in this room are the people who care. How do we, one, get other people to care? And what type of requirements, you said you've been fighting that everybody needs to be licensed. How can we help in that endeavor? What are your ideas?
My opinion would be that towns, not people, but towns need to incorporate their own rules when it comes to fertility. And I'm not saying ban
Right.
fertility. Regulate it within the town. Then we have the regulating problem that goes along with it. You can pass all the laws you want, but if the cop doesn't pull you over for speeding, you're gonna keep speeding. So there's no easy answer, but I think it can start very locally, townwide, and eventually maybe the state can start to see our concerns and act upon it. And then the state can issue that regulation.
So, I'm sorry, but my idea is that the town of Harwich should be requiring anyone who's applying anything to landscapes, hang on, just let me finish. Excuse me?
You're preaching to the choir. We want the same.
But not entirely, because I've gotten pushback on this already. What I'm saying is, should require simply record keeping and reporting. That is, anyone who is applying stuff to landscapes should be registering with the town. I don't even want to use the term licensing, because that implies, taking a test and knowing chemistry and whatever else. It's just registering with the town, so the town knows you're doing that, and the town knows to expect a report at the end of the year, at least in aggregate, what you did for the year. Would you support a thing like that?
Oh, in the Hartford?
Absolutely.
Music to my ears.
So I don't, Warren's probably one of the most respected landscapers in this town.
The mics are off on this side of the room, I'm gonna move over there.
I don't
Okay.
think Warren has this, and I stumbled across it. This is my certificate from Barnstable County that I got in 2015. There's 3 towns on Cape Cod, I believe it's Chatham, Nantucket, and Mashpee, that require this certificate to apply fertilizers in those 3 towns. So somehow, this may be a starting point that we can maybe get this. You do, yeah, whenever. You don't have to right now.
Thank you. Scott has been waiting and waiting and waiting, so, and there are others in the room, I'm sure, so,
It's been so long, it's gonna seem totally out of context, but it has to do with the science of the nutrients, the travel of the nutrients from a lawn or from plants or from leaves that have fallen off the trees. And it's a two-part question. Number one, all that material in the fall, what's the best thing to do with it if you want to minimize the amount of phosphorus or leaching into into a pond that's close to your yard. You leave the leaves, which is one environmentally friendly thing that you hear a lot about, or do you cart them to the landfill where they're further away from the water? The second question is, does it even matter if you're carting it a mile away? It's going to get into the groundwater, the water table anyway, and make it into the lake. It'll just be there a little bit later. Two questions.
So, I mean, great question. So, leave the leaves or not, right? So, we can go round and round on this. But basically, those leaves are going to break down, and they're going to contribute to a recycling of nutrients in the plant system. So if you think about how the natural world works, outside of the managed landscape, the leaves fall down, they get decomposed, the nutrients get released, and then the plants take them up. And then they get deposited again when the leaves fall. And that's the natural system. So often leaving the leaves would reduce the need to provide additional nutrients, right? Because you're recycling nutrients in the system.
But if you have no intention of ever adding nutrients in the first place, and from what I heard, the soils here, even after 20 years of no phosphorus and fertilizers, are still holding plenty of phosphorus to provide the necessary, at least that necessary nutrient. Does it help?
I would say that it does help. It helps with holding on to the nutrients and being available for the plant material that does exist there.
Can I just respond to Scott? Because the other reason for leaving the leaves is not really about nutrients, it's about insects.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to, support the insects having the larvae,
No, I understand that.
then,
Yeah.
that's
Mr.
really
Birch.
Russ, thanks for coming. You're a wealth of knowledge. I came in after the last meeting I was here. We talked briefly. I'm so glad you're here. I don't know whether I missed it when you were going over soil tests or not, but can you briefly touch on pH and how important that is to the availability of the bonded nutrients?
Sure. So, yeah, the way that pH works in a soil, it's a measure of hydrogen ions, and the different nutrients in soil become more or less available based on that pH. And so we can take phosphorus as an example. Phosphorus's maximum availability in a soil is typically between a pH of 6 and 7. As the pH changes lower, it becomes unavailable. So it doesn't mean that there's less of it in the soil. It just means that there's less available for plants to take up because it binds with irons and aluminums. On the other end, if you go a higher pH, it binds with calciums and other cations. So it takes it out of availability. So it's important to maintain pH in that range for maximum availability of nutrients for the plants. And there's also a bacterial benefit there, in that microbial activity is at its maximum between 6 and 7. So it's like an efficiency of your system if you maintain that. For plant material that likes to be in those ranges. There's plant material that doesn't like to be in that range. So
It's one of the key factors I look at on my soil test,
Yeah.
pH and cation. And pretty much can work on those two numbers and reduce the
Yep.
environmental lawn.
an important piece for a lawn.
Okay, there's someone all the way in the back, and then Patrick. I think that's you. Yes, I'm sorry.
I wholeheartedly support the idea of reporting and requiring when fertilizer application is going down. Oftentimes we hear people say in response to that, well, all we need is education. We need education. I really feel that's just an underlying way of saying we don't want to make changes. But we know that in this day and age, everybody's aware of the fertilizing problem. So if they're not already reading the packages and being educated, then we're doing something wrong. So I really think it needs to be regulated. So my question for Russ, are there any towns, or I think there are some towns that regulate it. Are there towns that regulate the fertilization application? And if so, has that improved
So, great question. So when the nutrient regulations were developed, there was the ability for towns to adopt their own plant nutrient regulations. And some towns decided to adopt their own plant nutrient regulations. Some towns included a licensing thing. And so, but I don't have data on whether that created impacts as far as nitrogen or nutrient loading to water bodies.
Does the extension service, are they looking to get data on that? Because I would think that those would be models to see if it's successful for local towns to build their regulations.
So not from the town level, but the overall picture of nutrient research is quite in-depth. But there are significant complexities to the nitrogen portion that make it difficult to accurately determine what is contributing to the excessive amounts in water bodies, right? So the data that we have generally doesn't come from exact numbers. It comes from extracted numbers, assimilated numbers on different other research projects. So to know exactly is nearly impossible because we'd have to know every single thing, every leaf landing on every piece of property and extrapolating that out for a whole watershed to determine what's going into it and then what's elevated on that end. So,
Do you have a gut feeling, being in the business for so many years, whether it would have an impact if towns had local regulations? I know you live in hot seat.
yeah, I think regulations in itself are sometimes educational, right? So, and providing that education through that manner could be successful, yeah. I mean, yeah.
They might want to take a look at Nantucket's nutrient requirements. Everyone that applies nutrients on Nantucket fertilizers period is listed on the chart.
Right.
You know exactly who is licensed to apply fertilizer on the island of Nantucket, and it goes on and on. They're all licensed. Every applicator, every landscaper has to be licensed.
So,
And if you go on their website,
Yeah, I
you'll
see.
exactly what the nutrient requirements are, how they go about it, when they can apply it, how much they can apply. It's pretty informative.
this is something that Town of Harwich could incorporate.
So we need to have that conversation. We're not going to complete that conversation today. But,
It's encouraging to hear that
Yeah,
people might be
so-
amenable to it.
so there's at least one person online who wants to talk. Patrick,
I do have a question, but go ahead.
you're going to, okay, Stanley.
You're muted.
Can't hear you, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? I'm sure you
Yes,
can.
Yes.
Thanks, John. It's hard for us at home to hear many of the speakers, and I might be replying to a statement that I didn't hear. I thought I heard someone say that you can't buy, I'm not a professional landscaper, I cannot buy fertilizer with phosphorus on the Cape. That may have been said, that's what I thought I heard. And I'm not a professional landscaper. I did a quick Google search, where can I find it? Not a sophisticated one. And about 3 miles from here, at Agway and Dennis, I can buy Fox Farm Tiger Bloom liquid fertilizer, concentrate 284 nitrogen and phosphorus, 1 gallon, and there are 5 gallons available in stock. So I could go there right now and buy it and pour it on my land or my neighbor's land. One quick reply, John, you mentioned leave the leaves. And the benefit of leave the leaves is not simply for fertilizing the land naturally with the leaves, but also our native pollinators are dying out, and many of them overwinter under the leaves on our lawns, whether they're turf lawns or Cape Cod lawns or anything. I think this is a fantastic discussion, but I have 2 requests. One is, as I love this. I think it's really welcome. I love this interchange of information. But I think I would like us to address also the cost of doing nothing, the cost of our current policy, the cost of not taking an action. And there are many kinds of costs like that. Like, for example, how many of all our shellfish beds that I used to go clamming in Harwich, how many are not offline? Last time I looked, there was one. How much money has been spent mitigating phosphorus in our ponds? I know of 3 alum treatments: Skinnicut Pond, Hinckley's Pond, and our half of Long Pond. And I wonder how much money, taxpayer money, was spent on doing that. Whereas if we had cut off the source, perhaps it wouldn't have cost us those tax dollars that all of us pay, whether or not we put phosphorus on our lawns. But I would hope that this discussion would be broad and also consider public health implications. And as we continue, I hope you're going to continue, and I'm confident that you folks will continue the discussion. I would hope that other voices be brought in, such as the Board of Health. I know, having been on Board of Health in Central Mass, I would welcome this discussion, and the public health implications are really something to be considered. But what are all the costs of taking no action, which is what we're doing today? That's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Patrick?
Yeah, Russ, I'm curious, most of your nutrient requirements were established for lawns today. What would be the nutrient requirements to us before humans got here? I don't see True Green going out and spraying the woods to make sure the trees are growing well. You know, what are the nutrient requirements in a natural environment? And can that be established a baseline that we work towards, rather than the baseline of, I need the most pristine green lawn in Cape Cod, so I'm gonna take all these chemical additives to be there. Do you understand my question?
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm just going to restate Patrick's question because I don't think people online can hear
Oh,
him.
right.
Briefly, is what are the nutrient requirements in a natural, pre-civilized environment?
So, yeah, I mean, what a great question, right? So, I mean, this really comes down to how we decide to manage our landscapes, right? And so if we decide to manage our landscapes as close to the natural system that is here, the least amount of inputs would be needed. When you start doing other activities, we know the limitations of our soil. So if we wanted to produce food here, those require nutrients, because the nutrients that are here aren't sufficient to produce the biomass that would be needed for food, fiber, or even building in many cases. Within a landscape, you have choices to make, whether you use lawn or, which in many cases is a desirable landscape to have. You can reduce the amount of your lawn. You can have shrubbery, you can have native landscapes. There's a lot of options. And choosing those different options might have impacts on the amount of inputs you need. So you can make those kind of judgmental decisions. But you can also manage turf to have very little negative impacts on the environment if it's done properly. But yeah, I mean, it's really comes down to the education of the individual property owner and how they want to manage their property and what they need from their property. I often think of my own yard, and I have a lawn, and I have a lawn because I have dogs that I like to play frisbee with, and I have kids that I like to play soccer with. And so I try to manage that turf to the lowest amount of nutrients that I need to get the function that I need out of it, while not, having detrimental impacts on the environment. But areas that I don't need for lawn, I try to keep in the natural ecosystem as close as it can, where it doesn't require any inputs.
If I what's really a good baseline question everyone should be asking? What is the minimum nutrients I need for my desired plants?
Yep, for the function of the things that you need from your yard.
Instead of just going to a contractor, make it look pretty.
Yep.
Sophia, did you
Yeah.
I have a question.
have something?
Yeah.
Hey,
Has anyone ever gone out in the middle of the woods and taken a soil sample for phosphorus?
Yeah.
Underneath the pine trees and the oak trees, I mean, to see what the level is in the woods or forest
Yeah,
on the Cape here.
for sure.
Because all that organic matter is breaking down. Pine needles, oak leaves, twigs, branches, it's all contributing.
Yes.
But has it ever been tested compared to what we're testing on the lawn?
Yeah, it has. I don't know, I have the data off the top of my head. But you can do a soil test anytime you want. We have lots of soil tests from different areas. And it ranges. Even in turf systems, it ranges. Turf systems that have been managed a long time don't necessarily have excessive phosphorus, leading to environmental contamination. That
So
is,
is the wooded areas contributing a tremendous amount of phosphorus that everyone else is paying for?
no. And neither is turf in many cases. All right, so if you're looking, I don't have all the soil test data, but if you were to look at a lot of soil tests, in a lot of situations, it's in the very low or low category in unmanaged systems. Sometimes in turf systems, it's frequently in that category too. You would want to be in the optimum category for a turf system. But there's a lot of other systems where we.
What I was saying before is we don't purchase fertilizers with phosphorus in them. We haven't for a long time.
Right, Yep.
Everything's, middle number is 0.
yep.
And
At least
then-
20 years it's been like that.
Could you clarify that to the speaker that's at home? Because
Oh.
he thinks it's not
He
available.
went-
It
he
is
went
available.
ag way
We
where
just don't use
Commercial
it.
applicators and nothing.
So, I mean, that's a great question about the different sources of fertilizers, but oftentimes the fertilizers used are designed specifically for turf, and they are designed, especially the synthetic ones, because they can have what we call an incomplete fertilizer. They can take the phosphorus out of it. And so phosphorus hasn't been in turf applications of fertilizers for like 20 years because we know that situation.
I'm sorry, but
Okay.
there are products being sold to landscapers in this town, and those landscapers are selling them to their clients that are organic appearing things, composted things. Part of the inputs is municipal biosolids, and those things have a significant amount of phosphorus in them. So it's not true that plant nutrient products are being applied. I should say it is true that plant nutrient products are being applied to Harwich lawns that have not just a little bit of phosphorus, but way more phosphorus than any interpretation of the UMass guidelines would say was ever called for, and in fact, way more nitrogen that any interpretation of the UMass guidelines would be called for. And so just saying that it doesn't happen is not true, and that concerns me. We're having a confused conversation. Yes, the people in this room who go and buy a product which is marketed specifically for lawns and says specifically that it has no phosphorus in it, okay, but there are people who are putting tons of phosphorus on Harwich lawns. It's just a fact. And the question, I mean, part of what triggered this meeting today was, what are we going to do about that? So, okay, sorry, I'm ranting. It is now 2:39. We have a presentation from, at least a discussion from Amy. I do want to end the thing at 3. I think there was one more question, and if you can keep it like really short, but there's someone back here, and then I want to find out if there's anyone more online, and then we really have to get to the final thing here. So, yes.
I just wanted to say, this is very simplistic. I'm reminded of the drug slogan, which just said, just say no. The Garden Club has been involved in promoting 2 larger organizations, Pollinator Pathways of Cape Cod and the National Wildlife Federation, and both of them to register your properties. One of the requirements is not to use pesticides and fertilizers, in the lawns, and to do things like, legal leaves and plant native plants and all those things. And we've promoted this in Harwich, and we're always looking for new people to sign on to this. Pollinator Pathways of Cape Cod has a great list of native plants. You can register your property for nothing, you get a great website, and one of the things you promise is just not to put, and then you put up a sign, and next thing you talk to your neighbors, and before you know it, you've got 6 people on the street, and the conservation land across the street, and you've got this little corridor of people who aren't using pesticides. It sounds terribly grassroots and terribly simple, but there are simple things that homeowners can do to promote the work.
Okay, thank you.
Really quick, just right on that note, there's a couple things that landscapers can do, and one of the things that you said, Russ, is about when you described your own lawn and said, you have this space that you use for your dog and you use for your playing soccer. I would hope that landscapers would approach homeowners with that kind of mindset of like, describe to us first what activities you're doing on, because I know so many people who have these full-out turf yards that go down a hill. Why do they not playing soccer or croquet or whatever on a hill, right? So it's really important for landscapers, if we want to solve this problem, for landscapers to ask homeowners questions about the use of their property to try to drive them to a place that makes sense. Some of the things I see don't make sense, but because everybody else is doing it, people want to do it. And they think it looks good to have like lawns that go down a hill with patches of mulch. That doesn't even look nice. There's so many other things that you can do with that space that look nice. So I would hope that landscapers would take this as a little step of pushing back on homeowners.
They can.
And saying, why would you want a lawn that goes down a hill? That doesn't make any sense.
Because most homeowners want what's pictured on that wall.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's not the landscape, it's the home.
I want the big question. John, a quick question, very quick. Is the compost I get out of the Harwich transfer station safe or not?
I can't answer that question, but I do know one thing. It's made out of a lot of leaves, so presumably it has phosphorus in it, but I don't know that for a fact.
John, I got a quick question, real fast, to the speaker. What's the significance of road salts that the towns are pouring all over our roads in the wintertime? Is that stuff going into the water table? Right now, it's raining out there. Every bit of salt they put on the last week is going into the catch basins, right down into the soil.
Yeah, it's not an expertise of mine, but I'll say this, that most of the
Common sense answer.
de-icing salts are not nitrogen and phosphorus based. So,
Salt.
yeah, they're sodium
You
and
don't want to drink
chloride.
salt water.
Correct, but, yeah, they're not contributing to the same type of environmental contamination because they're not limiting nutrients in water bodies.
Different type of contamination.
Potentially, yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, just real quick, before. So.
We're just saving your voice for you.
Yeah, don't worry.
It's pretty much gone.
For another meeting, I wonder if it might be helpful for other people, as well as myself, for when we're thinking about what we can and might do in Harwich differently. Do we want to do what Orleans did? Do we want to do what Nantucket did? Do we want to do our own thing, which is sort of what you had drafted, John? And I just wonder if there's like a better, if we want to raise the bar in terms of the way that the professionals act in, go about our business, if there's sort of like a shift from language of restricting to language of reporting and recording and setting that bar higher for proper practices and best practices. And for me, I need to do a little more research on what Orleans did and what that looks like. And, I think that if there's a effort to get everybody on the same page, and it seems like for the professionals in the room, like it rubs people the wrong way to use kind of prohibitive and restrictive terms, and I think it encourages us to do better work and, have that be the standard in this town, is like we're doing soil tests and we're doing the right things. Then there's kind of, everyone has a better chance, I think, of continuing the conversation, which is what we need to have, so.
Well said.
Sounds good.
And
Amy.
to that end, I was gonna put a little homework on you all, because you're the ones out there working in the different towns. If you could please send me, from just the conservation website, examples of what other towns are doing that you think is actually working well, would be really helpful. Or just your own, if you didn't have a chance to talk today, and you have closing thoughts, please email them to me, because I'm hoping to follow this up, relatively quickly and have another more tailored discussion, going forward. But with that being said, I wanted to introduce you all that it was a good opportunity for the fresh off the press Cape Cod freshwater pond buffer guidance, which has a lot to do with what we've talked about today. So the Cape Cod Commission partnered or created a freshwater initiative across the Cape to generate this document. It was APCC as well as Crawford Land Management was the chosen contractor to help with this document, and individuals such as myself and pond groups and everybody else. It was a document that a lot of people helped create, and I'm pretty proud of it. So I wanted to introduce it to you because a lot of this is about better practices. It's about thinking about what you're using your landscape for, as we were talking about. It's about alternatives to lawns that are still low maintenance, low growing, that you don't have to mow, and et cetera. So I'm gonna so you can go, and if you can't find this on the Cape Cod Commission website, you can email me, and we're gonna put it on our website as well. I'm gonna quickly go through because we don't have a lot of time. So this was generated, basically the State of Our Waters document in 2018 really highlighted the need to really start looking at the water quality in our freshwater ponds. And on the right side here, it talks about the factors that contribute to water quality degradation, such as septic systems, site development, construction activity, structures, pollutants from stormwater, and irresponsible landscaping practices. So, and there's a lot of links to various different documents that you would find really helpful. So the importance of vegetated buffer strips, as you talked about, you don't need a hillside of lawn all the way down to your water system. Why is it important? Erosion control, stormwater, better water quality, though it's a sink for nutrients, for sediments. Basically, to try to keep your pond clean, it's important to have vegetated buffer strips. Helps control water temperature. Aesthetically pleasing depending on your, I guess what your aesthetic is, and really great for habitat. So what does a healthy buffer have? Little to no development, dense layers of native plant species diversity, natural litter, and it's supposed to be a maintenance-free or low-maintenance zone. If you don't have these buffers to your ponds and you're creating one, the first few years are going to require some maintenance to have it established, but after that, it's really meant to be a maintenance-free zone that you're not supposed to manage. The role of the Conservation Commission, we'll have to go through that today. Different types of native plant communities. And also on the chart is kind of an interesting diagram of just how much width certain species might need from ponds. All different, a lot on different native plants. What are ecotypes? Why choose the native plants? Again, this is like a 58-page document, so I'm not going to go through each page, but it's something that you can go through yourself. It talks about the common invasives. It talks about the negative impacts of invasive plant species. how to manage them generally. And then when you're designing a landscape, things that homeowners and landscapers should look at when looking at what you're gonna plant and what you're gonna do. What are your soil conditions? What's your topography? What's your existing vegetation? What's your exposure? What do you plan on doing in your yard area? These all play factors in what you're gonna plant where. Identify your priorities. Do you wanna be able to play soccer with your kids? But yet you still wanna have a native, maybe pollinator buffer strips so that you can attract different wildlife to your area. You know, it's not your landscape doesn't have to be just one thing. It can serve numerous purposes, both for you and for the environment. And I know a lot of you all know all this, but this is something I think is going to be a good document to hand out to the general public and have made available to the general public. So selecting and locating plants, just because something is native, you know, you're not going to put, you know, high bush blueberries in a sand dune, you know, just because it's native. It's not going to do well there without a lot of care. So, right plant, right place. How to do an installation. How to preserve your pond buffers. These are different options for lawns. Not saying we go by all of these, because I know this commission in particular typically don't like to see a lot of mulch, but living mulches, leaf litter, species diversity on slopes, landscaping practices such as mow high and recycle your lawn clippings. All things that we can do. If everybody were to do a couple of these things just a little bit better, we'd be in a lot better state than we are right now. Talks about the benefits of lawn alternatives and a couple of different types. Setting realistic expectations when you start a restoration. I mean, it's going to take a good 5 to 10 years to really see it look natural and how it should look, but it is a process, and we didn't get where we are today in just a year. You know, to reverse some things, it's going to take longer too. And then what's nice about this document too is it actually gives you some good examples depending on where you live, on what type of wetland, and what you're trying to accomplish on your landscape. Just some general ideas for what your landscapes can look like. So just different concepts depending on different locations, different sites, and different desires and needs. I know I'm flying through, but I wanted to give you an overview. Lots of concepts. And then talk about, the different types, different plants and whatnot. So this will be available probably next week on the Conservation Department website. You can reach out to me if you want, if you have any questions about it, or you can reach out to Jessica Rempel at the Cape Cod Commission. I don't think there's anything else.
Thank you, Amy. Are there questions or comments about this?
I have a comment.
Well, hang on, let's do the
Well,
commissioners
I
first.
just think it's been very informative. I've learned a lot today, and I thank you all for coming and sharing your expertise with us.
Yeah, I agree. This is
Great.
fantastic.
Great, thank you. I agree. Ann?
What I love so much about this document, and I was part of like the early
Yeah.
stages of this too, but what I love so much about this is that it helps people imagine something different. I mean, when I bought my property here, all my neighbors were telling me, like, oh, you have to use this landscaper because you use this, you know, because there was this sense of like, oh, you have to fit into what we're doing, which turned out to be so wrong in so many ways. And to help people understand right from the get-go that there are lots of choices and to show what they might look like, I think is really important. And you guys are on the front line of all this, but you're the ones who are dealing with the people who go to you and say, I need this or that in my lawn, and they never step back and say, well, does this make sense? You know, does it make sense for buying water out here, or am I just doing this because my neighbor told me that this is what everybody before did, or my ancestor on this property did, you know? I think we would have a much better environment if people thought about what they were doing.
Okay, so,
Just one quick thing. I think, you know, it's all great and wonderful. I definitely think you need to put in your plan the homeowner control of all these chemicals and pesticides. It's gotta be something, all these.
And fertilizers.
Fertilizer, pesticides, but we're required by law to practice what's called IPM, Integrated Pest Management, which allows tolerances for weeds, grubs, what have you, in the soil. The packages you buy at Ace Hardware, Home Depot, wherever, are 100% take care of everything. This gentleman's not gonna spray the whole golf course with weed control, he's gonna spot spray the 3 weeds. Same with Ryan, he's not gonna spray lawns, I don't know if they ever do blanket sprays again. But all those products that they're selling by the tons that have grown into the environment have zero knowledge, zero integrated pest management. They treat the whole lawn for weeds. Whether you have one weed, no weeds, whatever. Treat the whole lawn for grubs, treat the whole lawn for all their packages, and you buy the 5-step program at, say, Scott's or one of the other programs. Just put it into your knowledge, because that's where a big part of the problem is. I was at Ace Hardware the other day. In January, there's a big display of Roundup at the front door. I took a picture of it, just shaking my head, going, here, they're gonna go out and kill weeds today. Make your lawn beautiful and green. You gotta put it in, you gotta factor it into it. I don't have a problem getting the license, because you're gonna license the people that are already doing it right. We need to educate the people that are doing it wrong.
well, this is supposed to be a start in that process.
Good, we went from 1 person to 30.
Yeah.
Who was the one? You did. That's why you guys got the call.
Attaboy, Tom.
We talked about the fact that several of the towns and that Tufts as well have licensing for all landscapers. I guess in those situations, is there enforcement of the landscapers that are not necessarily residents?
They know, live there, but they just did it last year.
Unfortunately, I don't think there is.
Okay. 'Cause I mean, I kinda feel like that's an important part of it.
It's huge, but you have to start somewhere.
You gotta start somewhere, oh yeah.
And even within our pesticide applicators licenses that is done through the state, there's not a lot of enforcement because of resources and manpower. We've been crying for decades. Get this landscaper off the streets. Let them cut grass. Don't let them fertilize it. Leave it to the professionals. These guys know what they're doing. Guys that aren't licensed don't know what they're doing. And as I said before, it falls onto nutrients as well. If someone's educated in all of the pesticides that we have to be, nutrient goes right along with it. So we're learning it, studying it, practicing it. The problem is the vast majority are not. Good luck. We got
Are you
your
gonna
back.
help? Are
We
you
got
gonna
your
help
back,
make this
yes.
happen?
We would love to help.
Because I have a draft, which I'd love you to look at and react to.
And there's some very
Give
smart
me an
people in
email.
this room.
Give me emails, I'll send it. But it's almost 3 o'clock. We need to close the meeting. Any very quick last thoughts here? Any commissioners?
Real quick, I would just say that if anybody has concerns or thoughts about are you gonna, is that draft out there, or like?
No,
Okay, so
it's,
my response to the draft that came through was, just a concern for practical application in a business, and like, I do minimal fertilizing with my work, it is just me, but people I know who run bigger companies or have crews, like, what is practical, what could actually work, like, what are the roadblocks? So I think getting some of that for people who might, you know, be interested but have these concerns, feel like if there's any
Yeah,
people out here who can crowdsource that, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's important to get that feedback.
I can certainly send, if you're
Yeah,
amenable,
why
send
don't-
your
why don't
draft
you be-
for feedback. I
there
know
is a
the people
draft.
in this room.
you would do that,
Yep.
and that would be fabulous, and I'd love to see what
If there's
people
a
have
way
to
we
say.
could,
And if there's sufficient support, then we can try to take the next step.
yeah.
But there's no point in just,
If you wanna pass the notebook around, I'll put my email address in there,
well, Amy has,
and I think a couple of
I
these.
think I have you guys, but if you wanna make sure, that'd be great.
Are we gonna have another meeting?
I think discussion of another one of these meetings, I mean, we're going to return to our regularly scheduled broadcast on Wednesday next week. So, after that, I think we need to have another meeting. I think we need a little processing time to decide what would an agenda look like. Are we gonna invite someone else in to speak, like Russ, to follow up on Russ? I don't have a clear idea myself about that. I don't wanna wait 6 months to do this again, though. I think maybe in another month, or something like that.
A month or so.
So my opinion would be, guys like Russ, they have stature. Little landscapers don't. So get guys like Russ involved. 'Cause
So is there somebody at UMass
they
that
know,
can come in,
and they
you
have
know?
resources behind them.
Is there somebody at UMass, you know, that we can maybe get, so.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Touch base with Cindy at the Chamber of Commerce. She was gonna be doing some research, trying to find soil test grants.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
sure.
She could do that for us. She was gonna look into that. We can start with, you know, making them available to the critical areas around ponds and buffer zones and expand outward. And I'm sure we could get some landscape contractors to help people interpret them.
If there's grants available, why isn't the conservation department doing it?
Well, it's something that the health department and our department can look into, as well as to see if there's grants.
Well,
out there.
so,
I just asked her to get
Yep.
my contact.
Our health director has a question.
yes.
Not so much a question, more of a statement. We also have the People's Garden that is at the Cultural Center that we're doing a lot of education around this year. We're bringing in master gardeners to talk to residents about soil nutrients and the value in that. Testing their own, being able to do that on their own,
Yeah.
and what that looks like, what those kits might. So we are looking at doing some of that. I know there was a lady who said that education is like doing nothing, but for us, it's a tool in our tool belt. So we are working on building education up regarding proper applications, so.
Just make sure the soil tests are adequate, because there are a bunch of cheap kits that don't do cation exchange. Basically worthless without that.
Yeah,
So, is there a reason to use soil tests other than sending your soil to UMass to get UMass soil test? Is there a reason to do something else?
There are other companies
There's
that
a whole
do it.
bunch of
Plenty
companies
of
that do it.
companies that do it.
The county does it. I
County
believe.
does it.
We
They just
just do
pH.
pH, yeah.
So some cation, that's it, to really
The
keep.
two are essential, correct?
I would encourage folks to use the UMass soil test. The reason that other labs also do soil testing, but there are different methodologies to soil testing. And the methodology that UMass uses is specific to the soils that occur in Massachusetts. So other soil testing labs that use different methodologies are based on different soil textures and things like that. So they can make a difference in the interpretation of the results.
So then you have a bunch of results that are hard to compare, like you do
Correct.
send somebody's lawn to one lab, another lawn to another lab, you get two different
So
results.
it would not be apples to apples.
Yeah.
And that methodology will be, because it's UMass, will be around for
fantastic, though.
We gotta have a goal.
Yeah.
You want to be consistent in the methodology that you use on specific sites.
Yeah.
So Cranberry Valley Golf Course, for instance, tests every year. They use the same company every year, and they like that methodology. And it's not for us to judge that, but consistency, I think you'll agree, is essential to keeping the comparison apples to apples.
Okay. Do we need to, like, be formal about this and vote to adjourn?
Yes. Thank you all for coming.
And absolutely, thank you all for coming. This has been great. We'll see you again soon. Go ahead, Sophia.
Thanks for your time.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
All those in favor? Aye.